The phone rang, shattering the uneasy silence of James' office. He grabbed the receiver, his chest tight. "You've been set up," said a voice cold and final. The words sent shockwaves through him. Alex had betrayed him. The business, the trust, their empire destroyed. "The cops are on their way," the voice added before the line went dead. James froze, lowering the phone as disbelief turned to rage. Papers lay scattered across the desk, the rain outside pounding like a drumbeat of chaos. His career, his dreams, his name, ruined by the one person he trusted most. His mind screamed, but beneath the devastation, anger ignited. This wasn't just betrayal, it was war. And James would make Alex pay for every wound inflicted. Rain hammered the windshield as James sat in his car, gripping the wheel until his knuckles whitened. The call replayed in his head, each word tearing deeper. Alex had stolen not just the company, but his dignity. Rage surged inside him, sharper than the storm outside. "I'll make you pay," he whispered, voice trembling with venom. Every memory of trust twisted into betrayal, fueling his resolve. The streets glistened with neon reflections, but James' eyes remained locked forward, unblinking. Tonight marked the death of the man Alex once knew. What rose from the ashes would not be broken, it would be ruthless. James parked in a deserted lot, his hands trembling as he sifted through documents left in his briefcase. Contracts, emails, fragments of a life now shattered. Each paper was proof of Alex's treachery. His chest tightened as he realized how carefully the betrayal had been planned. Alex hadn't just wanted the company, he wanted James ruined. Betrayal was more than loss. It was humiliation. Anger surged through him, but so did focus. James saw what had to be done. Revenge wasn't only necessary, it was inevitable. He leaned back, breathing hard as determination hardened into something unshakable. James drove through the storm-soaked streets, each passing light smearing into streaks of red and gold on the wet pavement. His mind replayed years of partnership. Every laugh, every deal, every handshake, all poisoned now. Betrayal was not just the loss of business, it was the theft of trust. He slammed his fist against the steering wheel, the sound echoing inside the cabin. He whispered, Alex's name, not with grief, but with fire. What Alex took, James would reclaim. But vengeance would be more than justice. It would be his rebirth. James returned home to find silence pressing against the walls. His once ordered living room was now a battlefield of scattered files and broken trust. He dropped his coat, staring at the framed photo of him and Alex from their company's early days. The smiles were lies now, ghosts mocking him. Fury surged, but beneath it was clarity. He wasn't powerless. He had fragments, evidence, enough to strike back. Tonight, despair ended. Tomorrow, the hunt began. James whispered into the silence, "You'll regret betraying me." The words weren't a promise. They were a sentence. James sifted through his old office files late into the night, his mind replaying Alex's betrayal. Every folder, every contract, every email became a potential weapon. The rain outside had slowed to a drizzle, but inside the storm still raged. His breath grew heavier with each discovery. Emails signed in Alex's name, backdated deals, fraudulent agreements. It wasn't incompetence, it was deliberate sabotage. Rage welled up inside him, but beneath it was focus. James whispered, "I'll use your lies against you." His pulse steadied, determination locking into place. This wasn't blind anger anymore. It was strategy. The next day, James met with Sarah, an old colleague who had once worked closely with Alex. Her eyes darted nervously as she spoke. "Alex covered his tracks well, but people talk," she said softly. James leaned closer, the intensity in his eyes sharp. "If you know something, tell me." Sarah hesitated, torn between loyalty and truth. Finally she whispered, "There are offshore accounts. If you find them, you'll destroy him." James's jaw tightened. The betrayal had spread deeper than he imagined, but now he had a lead. For the first time since losing everything, he felt a flicker of control. James drove to a quiet records office, his fingers drumming on the steering wheel as anticipation gnawed at him. Inside, he searched through digital archives, his eyes scanning line after line of financial statements. Hours passed before his breath caught. Hidden transfers, coded withdrawals, all pointing back to Alex. His chest tightened, not with despair but with vindication. He copied the evidence, his hands steady for the first time in days. Alex's empire was built on fraud, and James now held the proof. "This is how I take you down," he muttered, his voice like steel in the silent room. But Alex wasn't blind. Word reached him that James was digging into his affairs. In a sleek high-rise office, Alex leaned back in his chair, his lips curling into a cold smile. "So he wants war," he muttered. He dialed a number, his voice sharp. "Make sure he stops before he finds anything else." On the other end, his enforcer grunted in agreement. Alex's betrayal was more than business. It was survival. And if James wanted revenge, he would have to survive Alex's counterstrike. The game had shifted, and the stakes had never been higher. James returned home late, exhaustion weighing heavy but his spirit unbroken. The evidence lay on his desk, a stack of documents that could ruin Alex. He stared at them, a grim smile tugging at his lips. This was no longer just survival, it was justice. Yet, deep inside, he knew Alex would strike back. Fear whispered at the edges of his mind, but determination silenced it. "You destroyed me once," James muttered, his voice steady, "but now I'll destroy you." The words were more than a vow, they were a declaration of war. James spread the evidence across his apartment table, the dim lamps spotlighting Alex's crimes. Offshore accounts, forged contracts, backdoor deals, it was all there. His chest tightened with fury, but beneath the fire was focus. "Every lie you told will be the blade I use," he whispered. The betrayal no longer broke him. It armed him. The storm of rage had cooled into precision. He was no longer just a victim. He was becoming a strategist. His resolve sharpened with each page. This wasn't desperation anymore. It was war, and he was ready to draw first blood. The next evening, James met Sarah again, this time in a dim underground parking garage. She looked around nervously before handing him a flash drive. "It's everything I could find," she whispered. James gripped it tightly, his eyes narrowing. "You're risking a lot," he said quietly. She shook her head. No, he ruined too many lives. For a brief moment, James saw that his fight wasn't only his own. It was justice for others who had been crushed by Alex's greed. He tucked the drive into his pocket, his mind already racing with the next step. Alone again, James loaded the files onto his laptop. His eyes scanned spreadsheets, bank records and messages, all leading back to Alex. Each discovery was like fuel, feeding his determination. Alex had built his empire on lies, exploiting trust at every step. James leaned back, exhaling slowly. For the first time, he wasn't drowning in anger, he was in control. His plan was no longer about survival, it was about demolition. He whispered into the silence, "I'll tear down everything you've built." The room felt charged, as though his rage had transformed into cold, calculating power. But Alex was not unaware. In his luxury penthouse, he studied a report his enforcer had delivered. James was gathering evidence. Alex smirked, sipping whiskey from a crystal glass. "So he thinks he can fight me," he muttered. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the city below. To Alex, James was just another obstacle, someone to be crushed like the rest. But his smile faded as he realized something different this time. James wasn't backing down. For the first time, Alex felt the faint sting of unease. James stood in front of a mirror, his reflection hard and unyielding. The man who once trusted too easily was gone. What stared back was someone forged by betrayal. He adjusted his jacket, the weight of his plan heavy on his shoulders. The documents were ready, the strategy clear. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about taking back his life. He muttered, "Alex, you've built your kingdom on lies. I'll be the one to burn it down." His reflection didn't waver, and for the first time he felt unstoppable. The ballroom hummed with curated laughter as James slipped past the velvet rope. Crystal chandeliers burned like small suns above polished donors, and his pulse settled into a steady drum. He had rehearsed every word and every breath. "Tonight you lose," he whispered, feeling the weight of the flash drive in his pocket. Across the room, Alex shook hands as if absolution came in cufflinks. The board hovered, blind to the fuse already lit. James kept moving, a shadow among benefactors, charting a path to the stage. He pictured the accounts and the signatures, each lie a rung he had climbed. Revenge had become clarity. Justice wore a sharper face. The mic waited like a blade. Backstage smelled of dust and velvet, a quiet place where masks slipped. Alex appeared as if summoned, smile precise, eyes calculating. "You won't do it," he said, voice soft as a threat. James met the gaze and felt the old wound harden into steel. "You taught me how to be ruthless," he said, keeping his tone even. Alex stepped closer, cologne and control thick in the air. "Walk away, and I'll make you solvent," he murmured. The offer fell like ash. James saw the offshore shells, the borrowed names, the stolen futures. He was done bargaining. "I'm not here to recover," he said. "I'm here to expose." On stage, the MC's applause faded as James reached the lectern. He felt the room pivot toward him, a tide drawn by curiosity. "We celebrate success," he began, keeping his cadence slow. "But success means nothing when it's stolen." Screens behind him bloomed with spreadsheets and wire paths. A murmur widened like a rip in silk. He named shell firms and dates, the pattern tight as wire. "Ask where the money slept," he said, "and who woke it." Security moved. The board stood. Alex's smile thinned into weathered paint. James did not raise his voice. Truth carried better than thunder. He pressed play, and the transfers marched across the light. Panic moved like static through the crowd. Lights dipped as if the building flinched. In the wings, a broad figure blocked James' exit. "Time to leave," the enforcer said, voice a door closing. James felt the surge of fear and let it pass through him. He had planned for heat. "You're late," he said, stepping sideways toward the service stairs. Radio chatter burst across the mezzanine, board members scattering like startled birds. The enforcer advanced, shoulders set to break resolve and bone. James held his ground a beat longer, then angled toward the camera wells where witnesses waited. The path of least violence was also the path of most eyes. The second volley hit harder. Reporters' phones lit as links propagated. Auditors pinged the mirrored drives. James walked back into the ballroom and watched denial collapse into arithmetic. "You framed me to hide your theft," he said evenly, eyes on Alex. Silence formed a ring around them. Alex reached for bluster and found dust. The chairwoman cleared her throat, voice brittle with duty. "Proceedings would follow," she said. James felt no triumph, only the quiet return of breath. Revenge had never promised to restore the past. It promised consequence. "We end it here," he said. The room, at last, listened. Morning arrived like a verdict, and the city spoke in headlines. James brewed coffee he barely tasted while news anchors recited numbers that matched his files. The board announced a special inquiry, and donors paused their checks. He stood by the window and let the silence fill the spaces where doubt once lived. "You wanted me erased," James said softly, "but you signed your name on every shadow." He stacked drives, labeled folders, and called counsel who now returned his calls. Revenge was no longer a wish, it was procedure. In the mirror, he saw no triumph, only a steadier breath. What Alex broke would not be rebuilt the same way. It would be rebuilt stronger, and it would remember. By noon, Sarah met him in a quiet legal office that smelled of toner and resolve. She slid a printed affidavit across the desk, eyes steady now. "No more secrets," she said, voice even. James nodded and signed his own statement, the pen heavy, the motion light. Their attorney mapped the next filings with calm precision. "You built this case brick by brick," the attorney said. James felt the heat of anger cool into endurance. "Alex fed on the silence of others," James said. "And I will end that hunger." The copier hummed like distant thunder. Paper became momentum. Fear ran out of places to hide. The counterpunch arrived in the afternoon, dressed as a statement from Alex's publicist. He called the evidence fabricated and the timing malicious. James read it once, then again, searching for substance, and finding only varnish. "You're speaking to smoke," he said under his breath. He forwarded corroborating ledgers to the auditors and tagged the regulator he once feared. The phones began to ring, not with pity, but with invitations to testify. "You turned me into your alibi," James said. "And now I will be your proof." He closed his laptop and felt the room steady. Lies were loud, numbers were patient. Evening found him outside the shuttered headquarters, the logo dim and embarrassed. He traced the glass with his reflection and remembered the first day he held the keys. "You didn't just steal money," James said. "You stole time." Security lights hummed like insects while a few employees slipped past, eyes lowered, futures uncertain. He sent a message to the remaining team, offering documents to shield their roles. Vengeance was a blade, but it would cut clean. He would not become what he chased. "I will win without poison," he said, letting the anger pass and the discipline stay. The wind moved wrappers along the curb, like small white flags. Night returned with a quieter pulse. James laid the last packet for investigators beside a handwritten note that asked only for truth. The rage that once ran ahead of him now walked beside him, tamed and useful. He called his mother and said he was fine, and for once it sounded almost true. "Tomorrow the filings go public," he told the room, and the room believed him. He pictured Alex rehearsing denials while the math rehearsed none. "You destroyed me," James said, "and I learned how to build from the ruins." He switched off the lamp and kept the window open. The city breathed, and so did he. The summons arrived with the morning mail, heavy as a stone and lighter than his fear. James turned the envelope over and felt the hush of his apartment lean in. The hearing date was set, and the venue gleamed like judgment. He brewed coffee and watched the steam rise like a small promise. "Tell the truth, and let it land where it must," he said. He called counsel and confirmed exhibits with a steadier voice than yesterday. Outside, traffic stitched the city back together. He opened his notes and removed every word that belonged to rage. Precision would do what anger could not. He closed the file and felt something give way inside, a knot loosening into breath. He met Sarah at a community center where the floor smelled of polish and second chances. She introduced him to former employees who spoke in careful tones about lost pensions and quiet dread. Shame rose, but it did not drown him. "I can help you file," James said, keeping his voice plain. Sarah watched his face and seemed to measure the distance he had traveled. "Don't let vengeance erase the people you're trying to protect," she said. He nodded and wrote names like vows. The room felt brighter without changing its lights. He saw the line between punishment and repair and decided to stand on the side that built. The mediation room was glass and hush, a place designed to launder conflict. Alex arrived with a polished smile and a settlement number that glittered like bait. "Take this and withdraw," he said, letting the figure breathe in the quiet. James studied the term sheet and saw the missing piece where restitution should live. "Repay employees first, then face the audit," he said. Alex's jaw settled into arrogance. "You want to win, not fix," James added. The mediator watched like a clock that refused to tick. James slid the paper back without flourish. He had come to end a story, not rewrite its lie. In the parking structure, footsteps echoed like warnings. The enforcer emerged from a seam of shadow and blocked the ramp with quiet shoulders. "You've said enough," he muttered. James felt the old heat rise and let it pass. "I'm recording," he said, lifting his phone without theater. A pause opened, large enough to choose. "Walk away," James added. Not as bravado, but as reprieve. The man's eyes flickered with a tired kind of hunger. He stepped aside, and the threat deflated like a punctured tire. Mercy kept the night from breaking. Evidence would do the rest. Night gathered at the edges of his desk as he drafted a charter for the team he meant to rebuild. He wrote in plain language that refused romance. Transparent books, whistle channels, shared upside, clean exits. "We will not become the thing we hunted," he said. He sent the draft to counsel, and to Sarah with a request for edits sharper than courtesy. Outside, sirens thinned into wind. He saved the file and backed it up twice, then stood and looked at the window long enough to see his reflection steady. Revenge had brought consequence. Now consequence would build culture. He turned off the lamp and left the room brighter than he found it. The courthouse steps felt like a mountain he had already climbed. Reporters formed a corridor of questions that never learned how to listen. James kept his eyes forward and his breath slow. "Today we finish what you started," he said, letting the words belong to the sky. Inside, marble held the echoes of older verdicts and older ghosts. He pictured the ledgers, the wires, the signatures that had once tried to erase him. Fear arrived and left like a tide that found no shore. Alex moved ahead with a smile that belonged to the past. Justice did not need his rage now. It needed his proof and his patience. The hearing room hummed with the quiet hunger of consequence. James took the stand and let the documents speak first. Dates stitched themselves into patterns the room could not ignore. "Funds did not vanish," he said, steady and low. "They were guided." Screens traced the path like constellations that refused to be unseen. Sarah watched from the gallery and did not blink. Counsel asked for clarity and received it in numbers. The judge wrote without looking up, and the air thinned to a clean blade. Alex's jaw learned a new language called silence. Cross-examination arrived, dressed as charm and left as arithmetic. Alex tried to turn doubt into currency and came up short. "You co-signed that transfer," counsel said, pointing without heat. The projector obeyed, and the room watched the ink refuse to lie. James felt anger knock and did not answer. He kept to the cadence of facts, the mercy of precision, the dignity of restraint. When the recess came, he stood and felt lighter than rumor. "You took my name," he said softly, "and I took back the truth." The ruling did not shout. It landed. Restitution to employees. Forensic audit referral. Board censure. Temporary control measures that carved a path back to honest books. James exhaled and did not chase relief. He let it find him. Alex stared at the table and saw the polished wood, answer nothing. "You framed a man and built a throne," the judge said, voice even. "Now you will pay the debt you taught others to carry." In the hallway, the world returned with softer edges. Justice felt like a door that opened inward. Night met him on the old office floor, where his reflection once learned how to dream. The logo had been taken down, leaving clean holes like constellations waiting for names. James laid a small card on the sill that carried a promise, not a brand. He called Sarah and asked for one more review of the charter. "We build this slow," he said, "and we build it clean." The city breathed through the glass with patient weather. He thought of the people who would be paid before profits and the books that would invite light. "You destroyed me," he said to the empty room. "And I learned how to last."